Normally, we would vote on the resolution after two speakers, as Robert's rule states. But since I've called on Delegate Milos about 3 times now, I'd like to hear what Delegate Milos has to say. So, on the floor mic, Delegate Milos.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Elizabeth Milos. I'm local 9119. I'm part of the University of Professional and Technical Employees, UPTE CWA, out of University of California. I'm a healthcare interpreter, and I would like to, basically a medical interpreter certified by the state of California, and my colleagues and I have fought a long struggle to make sure that the patients at our university centers receive the interpretation of language services that they need. However, we have found that the issues affecting the call center workers are also affecting interpreters, because interpreters are being framed and boxed into a call center model that I'm sure many call center workers are already familiar with, which I would say is very similar to the early days of industrialization, when the managers would come up and time the workers and how fast they were able to do their jobs. So it's really, I want to make it very clear that at University of California, we have in-person interpreters as well as contracted interpreters through Language Line, who are presently using interpreters from outside of the United States. They're using interpreters who, according to the contracts, are not required to be certified interpreters, and they are following the video monitoring interpreting model, the call center model, which directly affects patient care and can affect as well does affect the working conditions of the interpreters. There is a very clear study that had been done back in 1999 and updated in 2003, which is called the Moser-Merzer study, which made it very clear. It was a study that was conducted by the International Conference Interpreters of Switzerland. And they studied they compared the accuracy of video remote interpreting versus in-person simultaneous interpreting. And they arrived at a very interesting result after recordings of the actual interpretation. The accuracy was reduced significantly after just 15 minutes of interpreting. So interpretation is a completely different profession, and but at the same time we are facing very similar issues because we are being put into the same antiquated, very oppressive model of really bad working conditions within the call center model. And so we fully support CWA's position in supporting the call center workers. In California, we are sponsoring, or we are working towards a legislation called AB 848, which is to prohibit offshoring of UC employment positions. However, there are certain amendments that are being done which we need to take a look at, in my opinion, my personal opinion, which have to do with outsourcing, not offshoring. But in any event, we would like to support this CWA resolution in the hopes that we can also get full support from CWA for interpreters CWA-wide in order to be able to address this ongoing and difficult situation for interpreters.
So this is Steve Zeltzer with Workweek Radio, and I'm with Lisa Milos, and she's an interpreter, CWA delegate of UPTE, which is in negotiation now for a contract. You raised at this convention a question of outsourcing. How is outsourcing affecting
Well,
Outsourcing is affecting us because right now at the University of California, we have what's called outsourcing by attrition. In other words, bargaining positions that are being left by people who change jobs or retire are not being replaced by bargaining by union positions, but rather those hours are being replaced by companies that outsource interpreting services. In general, outsourcing is very common to interpreting services. That is a need because there's not all the 140 different languages are not available, and there's big demand. However, the outsourcing has taken even a more dangerous turn in the sense that these companies are now offshoring jobs to interpreters that are living outside of the country, from Costa Rica, Panama, Peru, Dominican.
You're not certified interpreters.
And they're not certified, or what I'd like to be more precise regarding that. The contracts that we have been able to see on the part of UC do not require the interpreters to be certified, which is very worrisome because that affects patient care, but also even the act of prioritizing and making healthcare interpreting follow through, rather be boxed into a call center model, is very also dangerous for patient care because it increases fatigue among interpreters. Interpreting is not the same thing as being a call center or customer service representative on the call center. And even if it
Is that the deprofessionalization of interpreters?
It's deprofessionalization. That's exactly what you're talking about, yeah. And that's not to say that the customer service professionals are not professions. It's just a different profession. And that's not to say that we would tolerate inhumane and conditions for any worker. We're realizing that call center operators, call center workers are subject to very difficult situations. They have to work hour after hour after hour, and interpreters, they want to fit us into that model.
Now, the University of California is publicly funded by taxpayers in California. Why are they trying to outsource not only jobs in this country to other places outside UC, but out of the country? I mean, the regents, who do they represent? Who does Governor Brown represent?
I don't know who Governor Brown represents because I didn't vote for him. But
I don't know who he represents.
I think what he's representing is basically the businesses that are putting in a lot of money and getting a lot of money from the state of California to set up these big telecommunications infrastructure in these major hospitals and even in the courts.
So they're profiting from outsourcing?
Yeah, I believe.
Is that part of privatization?
I don't want to, I don't have the documentation to prove it, but at the end of this month, actually, the University of California is going to have the state auditor is going to be publishing a report on UC subcontracting practices. So we're going to see there exactly where they're putting their money in outsourcing. I don't think it separates between outsourcing and offshoring, but we're going to see a little bit more regarding that. And I think that, yes, I think somebody's making big money out of this, and at the expense of patients, at the expense of workers. And video interpreters, we're not against video interpreters. We're not against the field of video monitoring interpreting. It's just that for patient care and for it should be as a backup situation until the in-person interpreter arrives, in order to really provide equitable health care for limited English proficient patients. And in the courts, I believe also the fatigue level that accompanies the use of video interpreting for court interpreters is also something that should be looked into. So we're hoping that we're going to be able to get some support from CWA to be able to address this issue among interpreters on a nationwide level across the different sectors, to be able to deal with this and in a much unified way.
And you also tried to bring up the issue of NAFTA here, because the CWA resolution here calls for making NAFTA better, trying to reform it under the Trump administration. It says they should, try to pressure the trade negotiators who are business people to make a better NAFTA. And also, it doesn't call for cancellation of NAFTA, which was the position of the unions and the CWA on TPP. Why the change?
Well, I don't have the inside information regarding the change to President Shelton's position regarding his different conditions that he considers necessary in order to make NAFTA acceptable.
You think it can be reformed under the Trump administration?
I really doubt it. I don't have. I do not believe that there's anybody in the Trump administration that would be looking out for worker rights in any way, or environmental rights, or treaty rights of any of the indigenous communities that are affected across the Americas, from Canada through Mexico, as a result of NAFTA policies, that the oil, fossil fuel extraction, which is decimating communities and ruining the water throughout the United States.
So the issue of Driscoll workers, you were also going to bring that up, the boycott of Driscoll. I mean, how is that connected to NAFTA?
I wish I could have brought that up. Unfortunately, some people beat me to the mic. There was a long line, and so I was not able to bring that up at the time because there was only a limited amount of people that could speak. It's related to NAFTA because NAFTA policies impoverished peasant farmers in Mexico and impoverished the whole economy. It totally decimated the economy of Mexico, and it ended up selling off major industries, national industries, that impoverished the economy. And that, in turn, obviously suscitated that people needed to go find work to be able to feed their families, so they crossed the border. And that's not a crime to cross the border if you have to feed your families. Why can capital cross the border but humans cannot? And so the NAFTA policies have been completely have decimated not only workers in Mexico, but also in the United States, because it's creating this race to the bottom in terms of wages. The companies go and use workers from across the border in order to be able to exploit them, and to get in conjunction with the Mexican government's corruption, where they apply pressure on any kind of independent unions. In fact, it affects communication workers in many ways. Journalists in Mexico are getting killed, almost daily, and as well as the agricultural workers in Mexico, and the Driscoll boycott in particular, in Baja California. They're in the middle of collective bargaining, and they're not being recognized, and they are living under subhuman conditions, akin to slave labor conditions. Children are working out in the fields, 14-hour days, and under very, very hot weather, and also suffering a lot of reprisals, a lot of repercussions by the companies that they work for. And so we're basically, I would have liked to have the opportunity to have asked them to boycott Driscoll at this point, but I was beat to the mic, like I said. But I know that Chris Sheldon has expressed support for the Driscoll workers, and I hope that President Chris Shelton, I hope that he is supportive in voicing his opinion regarding that, and to calling for a boycott of Driscoll.